The Beetle Who Went on His Travels by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. There was once an emperor who had a horse shod with gold. He had a golden shoe on each foot, and why was this? He was a beautiful creature, with slender legs, bright, intelligent eyes, and a mane that hung down over his neck like a veil. He had carried his master through fire and smoke in the battlefield, with the bullets whistling round him. He had kicked and bitten and taken part in the fight when the enemy advanced, and, with his master on his back, he had dashed over the fallen foe and saved the golden crown and the emperor's life, which was of more value than the brightest gold. This is the reason of the emperor's horse wearing golden shoes. A beetle came creeping forth from the stable where the farrier had been shoeing the horse. "Great ones first, of course," said he, "and then the little ones. But size is not always a proof of greatness." He stretched out his thin leg as he spoke. "And pray, what do you want?" asked the farrier. "Golden shoes," replied the beetle. "Why, you must be out of your senses," cried the farrier. "Golden shoes for you, indeed!" "Yes, certainly, golden shoes," replied the beetle. "Am I not just as good as that great creature yonder, who is waited upon and brushed, and has food and drink placed before him? And don't I belong to the royal stables?" "But why does the horse have golden shoes?" asked the farrier. "Of course you understand the reason?" "Understand? Well, I understand that it is a personal slight to me," cried the beetle. "It is done to annoy me, so I intend to go out into the world and seek my fortune." "Go along with you," said the farrier. "You're a rude fellow," cried the beetle, as he walked out of the stable, and then he flew for a short distance till he found himself in a beautiful flower garden, all fragrant with roses and lavender. The lady birds, with red and black shells on their backs and delicate wings, were flying about, and one of them said, "Is it not sweet and lovely here? Oh, how beautiful everything is!" "I am accustomed to better things," said the beetle. "Do you call this beautiful? Why, there is not even a dung heap." Then he went on, and under the shadow of a large haystack he found a caterpillar crawling along. "How beautiful this world is," said the caterpillar. "The sun is so warm, I quite enjoy it. And soon I shall go to sleep, and die as they call it, but I shall wake up with beautiful wings to fly with, like a butterfly." "How conceited you are!" exclaimed the beetle. "Fly about as a butterfly indeed! What of that? I have come out of the emperor's stable, and no one there, not even the emperor's horse, who in fact wears my cast-off golden shoes, has any idea of flying except myself. To have wings and fly, why, I can do that already." And so saying, he spread his wings and flew away. "I don't want to be disgusted," he said to himself, "and yet I can't help it." Soon after, he fell down upon an extensive lawn, and for a time pretended to sleep, but at last fell asleep in earnest. Suddenly a heavy shower of rain came falling from the clouds. The beetle woke up with the noise, and would have been glad to creep into the earth for shelter, but he could not. He was tumbled over and over with the rain, sometimes swimming on his stomach and sometimes on his back, and as for flying, that was out of the question. He began to doubt whether he should escape with his life, so he remained quietly lying where he was. After a while the weather cleared up a little, and the beetle was able to rub the water from his eyes and look about him. He saw something gleaming, and he managed to make his way up to it. It was linen which had been laid to bleach on the grass. He crept into a fold of the damp linen, which certainly was not so comfortable a place to lie in as the warm stable, but there was nothing better, so he remained lying there for a whole day and night, and the rain kept on all the time. Towards morning he crept out of his hiding place, feeling in a very bad temper with the climate. 2 frogs were sitting on the linen, and their bright eyes actually glistened with pleasure. "Wonderful weather this," cried one of them, "and so refreshing. This linen holds the water together so beautifully that my hind legs quiver as if I were going to swim." "I should like to know," said another, "if the swallow who flies so far in her many journeys to foreign lands ever met with a better climate than this. What delicious moisture! It is as pleasant as lying in a wet ditch. I'm sure anyone who does not enjoy this has no love for his fatherland." "Have you ever been in the emperor's stable?" asked the beetle. "There the moisture is warm and refreshing. That's the climate for me, but I could not take it with me on my travels. Is there not even a dunghill here in this garden, where a person of rank, like myself, could take up his abode and feel at home?" But the frogs either did not or would not understand him. I never asked a question twice, said the beetle, after he had asked this one 3 times and received no answer. Then he went on a little farther and stumbled against a piece of broken crockeryware, which certainly ought not to have been lying there. But as it was there, it formed a good shelter against wind and weather to several families of earwigs who dwelt in it. Their requirements were not many. They were very sociable and full of affection for their children, so much so that each mother considered her own child the most beautiful and clever of them all. Our dear son has engaged himself, said one mother. Dear innocent boy, his greatest ambition is that he may one day creep into a clergyman's ear. That is a very artless and lovable wish, and being engaged will keep him steady. What happiness for a mother! Our son, said another, has scarcely crept out of the egg when he was off on his travels. He is all life and spirits. I expect he will wear out his horns with running. How charming this is for a mother, is it not, Mr. Beetle? For she knew the stranger by his horny coat. You are both quite right, said he. So they begged him to walk in, that is, to come as far as he could under the broken piece of earthenware. Now you shall also see my little earwigs, said a third and fourth mother. They are lovely little things and highly amusing. They are never ill-behaved except when they are uncomfortable in their inside, which unfortunately happens at their age. Thus each mother spoke of her baby, and their babies talked after their own fashion, and made use of the little nippers they have in their tails to nip the beard of the beetle. They are always busy about something, the little rogues, said the mother, beaming with maternal pride. But the beetle felt it a bore, and he therefore inquired the way to the nearest dung heap. That is quite out in the great world, on the other side of the ditch, answered an earwig. I hope none of my children will ever go so far. It would be the death of me. But I shall try to get so far, said the beetle, and he walked off without taking any formal leave, which is considered a polite thing to do. When he arrived at the ditch, he met several friends, all of them beetles. We live here, they said, and we are very comfortable. May we ask you to step down into this rich mud? You must be fatigued after your journey. Certainly, said the beetle. I shall be most happy. I have been exposed to the rain, and have had to lie upon linen, and cleanliness is a thing that greatly exhausts me. I have also pains in one of my wings from standing in the draught under a piece of broken crockery. It is really quite refreshing to be with one's own kindred again. Perhaps you came from a dung heap, observed the oldest of them. No, indeed, I came from a much grander place, replied the beetle. I came from the emperor's stable, where I was born, with golden shoes on my feet. I am traveling on a secret embassy, but you must not ask me any questions, for I cannot betray my secret. Then the beetle stepped down into the rich mud, where sat 3 young lady beetles who tittered because they did not know what to say. None of them are engaged yet, said their mother, and the beetle maidens tittered again, this time quite in confusion. I have never seen greater beauties, even in the royal stables, exclaimed the beetle, who was now resting himself. Don't spoil my girls, said the mother, and don't talk to them, pray, unless you have serious intentions. But of course the beetle's intentions were serious, and after a while our friend was engaged. The mother gave them her blessing, and all the other beetles cried hurrah. Immediately after the betrothal came the marriage, for there was no reason to delay. The following day passed very pleasantly, and the next was tolerably comfortable, but on the third it became necessary for him to think of getting food for his wife, and, perhaps, for children. I have allowed myself to be taken in, said our beetle to himself, and now there's nothing to be done but to take them in return. No sooner said than done. Away he went, and stayed away all day and all night, and his wife remained behind a forsaken widow. Oh, said the other beetles, this fellow that we have received into our family is nothing but a complete vagabond. He has gone away and left his wife a burden upon our hands. Well, she can be unmarried again, and remain here with my other daughters, said the mother. Fie on the villain that forsook her. In the meantime, the beetle, who had sailed across the ditch on a cabbage leaf, had been journeying on the other side. In the morning, 2 persons came up to the ditch. When they saw him, they took him up and turned him over and over, looking very learned all the time, especially one who was a boy. Allah sees the black beetle in the black stone and the black rock. Is not that written in the Quran? He asked. Then he translated the beetle's name into Latin and said a great deal upon the creature's nature and history. The second person, who was older and a scholar, proposed to carry the beetle home, as they wanted just such good specimens as this. Our beetle considered this speech a great insult, so he flew suddenly out of the speaker's hand. His wings were dry now, so they carried him to a great distance, till at last he reached a hothouse, where a sash of the glass roof was partly open, so he quietly slipped in and buried himself in the warm earth. "It is very comfortable here," he said to himself, and soon after fell asleep. Then he dreamed that the emperor's horse was dying, and had left him his golden shoes, and also promised that he should have 2 more. All this was very delightful, and when the beetle woke up he crept forth and looked around him. What a splendid place the hothouse was! At the back, large palm trees were growing, and the sunlight made the leaves look quite glossy, and beneath them what a profusion of luxuriant green, and of flowers red like flame, yellow as amber, or white as new-fallen snow. "What a wonderful quantity of plants!" cried the beetle. "How good they will taste when they are decayed! This is a capital storeroom. There must certainly be some relations of mine living here. I will just see if I can find anyone with whom I can associate. I'm proud, certainly, but I'm also proud of being so." Then he prowled about in the earth, and thought what a pleasant dream that was about the dying horse and the golden shoes he had inherited. Suddenly a hand seized the beetle and squeezed him, and turned him round and round. The gardener's little son and his playfellow had come into the hothouse, and, seeing the beetle, wanted to have some fun with him. First he was wrapped in a vine leaf and put into a warm trousers pocket. He twisted and turned about with all his might, but he got a good squeeze from the boy's hand as a hint for him to keep quiet. Then the boy went quickly towards a lake that lay at the end of the garden. Here the beetle was put into an old broken wooden shoe, in which a little stick had been fastened upright for a mast, and to this mast the beetle was bound with a piece of worsted. Now he was a sailor, and had to sail away. This lake was not very large, but to the beetle it seemed an ocean, and he was so astonished at its size that he fell over on his back and kicked out his legs. Then the little ship sailed away. Sometimes the current of the water seized it, but whenever it went too far from the shore, one of the boys turned up his trousers and went in after it, and brought it back to land. But at last, just as it went merrily out again, the 2 boys were called, and so angrily that they hastened to obey, and ran away as fast as they could from the pond, so that the little ship was left to its fate. It was carried away farther and farther from the shore, till it reached the open sea. This was a terrible prospect for the beetle, for he could not escape in consequence of being bound to the mast. Then a fly came and paid him a visit. "What beautiful weather!" said the fly. "I shall rest here and sun myself. You must have a pleasant time of it." "You speak without knowing the facts," replied the beetle. "Don't you see that I am a prisoner?" "Ah, but I'm not a prisoner," remarked the fly, and away he flew. "Well, now I know the world," said the beetle to himself. "It's an abominable world. I'm the only respectable person in it. First, they refuse me my golden shoes, then I have to lie on damp linen and to stand in a draught. And to crown all, they fasten a wife upon me. Then, when I have made a step forward in the world and found out a comfortable position, just as I could wish it to be, one of these human boys comes and ties me up and leaves me to the mercy of the wild waves, while the emperor's favorite horse goes prancing about proudly on his golden shoes. This vexes me more than anything. But it is useless to look for sympathy in this world. My career has been very interesting, but what's the use of that if nobody knows anything about it? The world does not deserve to be made acquainted with my adventures, for it ought to have given me golden shoes when the emperor's horse was shod, and I stretched out my feet to be shod too. If I had received golden shoes, I should have been an ornament to the stable. Now I am lost to the stable and to the world. It is all over with me." But all was not yet over. A boat, in which were a few young girls, came rowing up. "Look, yonder is an old wooden shoe sailing along," said one of the younger girls. "And there's a poor little creature bound fast in it," said another. The boat now came close to our beetle ship, and the young girls fished it out of the water. One of them drew a small pair of scissors from her pocket and cut the worsted without hurting the beetle, and when she stepped on shore she placed him on the grass. "There," she said, "creep away or fly if thou canst. It is a splendid thing to have thy liberty." Away flew the beetle, straight through the open window of a large building. There he sank down, tired and exhausted, exactly on the mane of the emperor's favorite horse, who was standing in his stable. And the beetle found himself at home again. For some time he clung to the mane, that he might recover himself. "Well," he said, "here I am, seated on the emperor's favorite horse, sitting upon him as if I were the emperor himself. But what was it the farrier asked me? Ah, I remember now. That's a good thought. He asked me why the golden shoes were given to the horse. The answer is quite clear to me now. They were given to the horse on my account." And this reflection put the beetle into a good temper. The sun's rays also came streaming into the stable and shone upon him, and made the place lively and bright. "Traveling expands the mind very much," said the beetle. "The world is not so bad after all, if you know how to take things as they come." End of The Beetle Who Went on His Travels by Hans Christian Andersen.
Briar Rose by the Brothers Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who had no children, and this they lamented very much. But one day, as the queen was walking by the side of the river, a little fish lifted its head out of the water and said, "Your wish shall be fulfilled, and you shall soon have a daughter." What the little fish had foretold soon came to pass, and the queen had a little girl who was so very beautiful that the king could not cease looking on her for joy, and determined to hold a great feast. So he invited not only his relations, friends, and neighbors, but also all the fairies, that they might be kind and good to his little daughter. Now there were 13 fairies in his kingdom, and he had only 12 golden dishes for them to eat out of, so he was obliged to leave one of the fairies without an invitation. The rest came, and after the feast was over, they gave all their best gifts to the little princess. One gave her virtue, another beauty, another riches, and so on till she had all that was excellent in the world. When 11 had done blessing her, the 13th, who had not been invited, and was very angry on that account, came in and determined to take her revenge. So she cried out, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead." Then the 12th, who had not yet given her gift, came forward and said that the bad wish must be fulfilled, but that she could soften it, and that the king's daughter should not die, but fall asleep for 100 years. But the king hoped to save his dear child from the threatened evil, and ordered that all the spindles in the kingdom should be bought up and destroyed. All the fairies' gifts were in the meantime fulfilled, for the princess was so beautiful, well-behaved, and amiable, and wise, that everyone who knew her loved her. Now it happened that on the very day she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and she was left alone in the palace. So she roamed about by herself, and looked at all the rooms and chambers, till at last she came to an old tower, to which there was a narrow staircase ending with a little door. In the door there was a golden key, and when she turned it, the door sprang open, and there sat an old lady spinning away very busily. "Why, how now, good mother?" said the princess. "What are you doing there?" "Spinning," said the old lady, and nodded her head. "How prettily that little thing turns round," said the princess, and took the spindle and began to spin. But scarcely had she touched it before the prophecy was fulfilled, and she fell down lifeless on the ground. However, she was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep sleep, and the king and the queen, who had just then come home, and all their court, fell asleep too. And the horses slept in the stables, and the dogs in the yard, and the pigeons on the housetop, and the flies on the walls. Even the fire on the hearth left off blazing, and went to sleep, and the meat that was roasting stood still, and the cook, who was at that moment pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box on the ear for something he had done amiss, let him go, and both fell asleep. And so everything stood still and slept soundly. A high hedge of thorns soon grew around the palace, and every year it became higher and thicker, till at last the whole palace was surrounded and hidden, so that not even the roof or the chimneys could be seen. But there went a report through all the land of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for thus was the king's daughter called. So from that time to time several kings' sons came and tried to break through the thicket into the palace. This they could never do, for the thorns and bushes laid hold of them as if it were hands, and there they stuck fast and died miserably. After many, many years, there came another king's son into that land, and an old man told him the story of the thicket of thorns, and how a beautiful palace stood behind it, in which a wondrous princess, called Briar Rose, asleep with all her court. He told too how he had heard from his grandfather that many, many princes had come, and had tried to break through the thicket, but had stuck fast and died. Then the young prince said, "Oh, this shall not frighten me. I will go and see Briar Rose." The old man tried to dissuade him, but he persisted in going. Now that very day the 100 years were completed, and as the prince came to the thicket he saw nothing but beautiful flowering shrubs, through which he passed with ease, and they closed after him as firm as ever. When he came at last to the palace, and there in the yard lay the dogs asleep, and the horses in the stables, and on the roof sat the pigeons fast asleep with their heads under their wings, and when he came into the palace the flies slept on the walls, the cook in the kitchen was still holding up her hand as if she would beat the boy, and the maid sat with a black fowl in her hand ready to be plucked. Then he went on still further, and all was so still that he could hear every breath he drew, till at last he came to the old tower and opened the door of the little room in which Briar Rose was, and there she lay fast asleep, and looked so beautiful he could not take his eyes off her, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But the moment he kissed her, she opened her eyes and awoke, and smiled upon him. Then they went out together, and presently the king and queen also awoke, and all the court, and they gazed on each other with great wonder. And the horses got up and shook themselves, and the dogs jumped about and barked, and the pigeons took their heads from under their wings and looked about and flew into the fields. The flies on the walls buzzed away. The fire in the kitchen blazed up and cooked the dinner, and the roast meat turned round again. The cook gave the boy the box on his ear so that he cried out, and the maid went on plucking the fowl. And then was the wedding of the prince and Briar Rose celebrated, and they lived together happily all their lives. End of Briar Rose by the Brothers Grimm. Read by Melissa Buell.
The Charmed Ring from Indian Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Charmed Ring. A merchant started his son in life with 300 rupees and bade him to go to another country and try his luck in trade. The son took the money and departed. He had not gone far before he came across some herdsmen quarreling over a dog that some of them wished to kill. "Please do not kill the dog," pleaded the young and tender-hearted fellow. "I will give you 100 rupees for it." Then and there, of course, the bargain was concluded, and the foolish fellow took the dog and continued his journey. He next met with some people fighting about a cat. Some of them wanted to kill it, but others not. "Oh, please, do not kill it," said he. "I will give you 100 rupees for it." Of course, they at once gave him the cat and took the money. He went on till he reached a village where some folk were quarreling over a snake that had just been caught. Some of them wished to kill it, but others did not. "Please do not kill the snake," said he. "I will give you 100 rupees." Of course the people agreed and were highly delighted. What a fool the fellow was! What would he do now that all his money was gone? What could he do except return to his father? Accordingly he went home. "You fool, you scamp!" exclaimed his father when he had heard how his son had wasted all the money that had been given to him. "Go and live in the stables and repent of your folly. You shall never again enter my house." So the young man went and lived in the stables. His bed was the grass spread for the cattle, and his companions were the dog, the cat, and the snake, which he had purchased so dearly. These creatures got very fond of him, and would follow him around during the day, and sleep by him at night. The cat used to sleep at his feet, the dog at his head, and the snake over his body, with its head hanging on one side and its tail on the other. One day, the snake, in course of conversation, said to its master, "I am the son of Raja Indrasha. One day, when I had come out of the ground to drink the air, some people seized me, and would have slain me had you not most opportunely arrived to my rescue. I do not know how I shall ever be able to repay you for your great kindness to me." How glad he would be to see his son's preserver! "Where does he live? I should like to see him, if possible," said the young man. "Well said," continued the snake. "Do you see yonder mountain? At the bottom of that mountain there is a sacred spring. If you will come with me and dive into that spring, we shall both reach my father's country. Oh, how glad he will be to see you! He will wish to reward you too. But how can he do that? However, you may be pleased to accept something at his hand. If he asks you what you would like, you would perhaps do well to reply, 'The ring on your right hand, and the famous pot and spoon which you possess.' With these in your possession, you would never need anything, for the ring is such that a man has only to speak to it, and immediately a beautiful furnished mansion will be provided for him, while the pot and the spoon will supply him with all manner of the rarest and most delicious foods." Attended by his 3 companions, the man walked to the well and prepared to jump in according to the snake's directions. "Oh, master," exclaimed the cat and dog when they saw what he was going to do, "what shall we do? Where shall we go?" "Wait for me here," he replied. "I'm not going far. I shall not be long away." On saying this, he dived into the water and was lost to sight. "Now what shall we do?" said the dog to the cat. "We must remain here," replied the cat, "as our master ordered. Do not be anxious about food. I will go to the people's houses and get plenty of food for both of us." And so the cat did, and they both lived very comfortably till their master came again and joined them. The young man and the snake reached their destination in safety, and information of their arrival was sent to the Raja. His Highness commanded his son and the stranger to appear before him, but the snake refused, saying that it could not go to its father till it was released from the stranger, who had saved it from a most terrible death, and whose slave it therefore was. Then the Raja went and embraced his son, and saluting the stranger, welcomed him to his dominions. The young man stayed there a few days, during which he received the Raja's right-hand ring and the pot and spoon, in recognition of his Highness's gratitude to him for having delivered his son. He then returned. On reaching the top of the spring, he found his friends, the dog and the cat, waiting for him. They told one another all they had experienced since they had last seen each other, and were all very glad. Afterwards they walked together to the riverside, where it was decided to try the powers of the charmed ring and pot and spoon. The merchant's son spoke to the ring, and immediately a beautiful house and a lovely princess with golden hair appeared. He spoke to the pot and spoon also, and the most delicious dishes of food were provided for them. So he married the princess, and they lived very happily for several years, until one morning the princess, while arranging her toilet, put the loose hairs into a hollow bit of reed and threw them into the river that flowed along under their window. The reed floated on the water for many miles, and was at last picked up by the prince of that country, who curiously opened it and saw the golden hair. On finding it, the prince rushed off to the palace, locked himself up in his room, and would not leave it. He had fallen desperately in love with the woman whose hair he had picked up, and refused to eat or drink or sleep or move till she was brought to him. The king, his father, was in great distress about the matter, and did not know what to do. He feared lest his son should die and leave him without an heir. At last he determined to seek the counsel of his aunt, who was an ogress. The old woman consented to help him, and bade him not to be anxious, as she felt certain that she would succeed in getting the beautiful woman for his son's wife. She assumed the shape of a bee, and went along buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. Her keen sense of smell soon brought her to the beautiful princess, to whom she appeared as an old hag, holding in one hand a stick by way of support. She introduced herself to the beautiful princess, and said, "I am your aunt, whom you have never seen before, because I left the country just after your birth." She also embraced and kissed the princess by way of adding force to her words. the beautiful princess was thoroughly deceived. She returned the ogress's embrace and invited her to come and stay in the house as long as she could, and treated her with such honor and attention that the ogress thought to herself, "I shall soon accomplish my errand." When she had been in the house 3 days, she began to talk of the charmed ring, and advised her to keep it instead of her husband, because the latter was constantly out shooting and on other such like expeditions, and might lose it. Accordingly, the beautiful princess asked her husband for the ring, and he readily gave it to her. The ogress waited another day before she asked to see the precious ring. Doubting nothing, the beautiful princess complied, when the ogress seized the ring, and reassuming the form of a bee, flew away with it to the palace, where the prince was lying nearly on the point of death. "Rise up, be glad, mourn no more," she said to him. "The woman for whom you yearn will appear at your summons. See, here is the charm whereby you may bring her before you." The prince was almost mad with joy when he heard these words, and was so desirous of seeing the beautiful princess that he immediately spoke to the ring, and the house with its fair occupant descended in the midst of the palace garden. He at once entered the building, and telling the beautiful princess of his intense love, entreated her to be his wife. Seeing no escape from the difficulty, she consented on the condition that he would wait 1 month for her. Meanwhile, the merchant's son had returned from hunting, and was terribly distressed not to find his house and wife. There was the place only, just as he knew it before he had tried this charmed ring which Raja Indrasha had given him. He sat down and determined to put an end to himself. Presently the cat and dog came up. They had gone away and hidden themselves when they saw the house and everything disappear. "Oh, master," they said, "stay your hand. Your trial is great, but it can be remedied. Give us 1 month, and we will go and try to recover your wife and house." "Go," said he, "and may the great God aid your efforts. Bring back my wife, and I shall live." So the cat and dog started off at a run, and did not stop till they reached the place whither their mistress and the house had been taken. "We may have some difficulty here," said the cat. "Look, the king has taken our master's wife and house for himself. You stay here. I will go to the house and try to see her." So the dog sat down, and the cat climbed up to the window of the room wherein the beautiful princess was sitting, and entered. The princess recognized the cat, and informed it of all that had happened to her since she had left them. "But is there no way of escape from the hands of these people?" she asked. "Yes," replied the cat, "if you can tell me where the charmed ring is." "The ring is in the stomach of the ogress," she said. "All right," said the cat, "I will recover it. If we once get it, everything is ours." Then the cat descended the wall of the house, and went and laid down by a rat's hole, and pretended she was dead. Now at that time a great wedding chanced to be going on among the rat community of that place, and all the rats of the neighbourhood were assembled in that one particular mine by which the cat had lain down. The eldest son of the king of the rats was about to be married. The cat got to know of this, and at once conceived the idea of seizing the bridegroom and making him render the necessary help. Consequently, when the procession poured forth from the hole, squealing and jumping in honor of the occasion, it immediately spotted the bridegroom and pounced down on him. "Oh, let me go, let me go!" cried the terrified rat. "Oh, let him go!" squealed all the company. "It is his wedding day." "No, no," replied the cat, "not unless you do something for me. Listen, the ogress who lives in that house with the prince and his wife has swallowed a ring which I very much want. If you will procure it for me, I will allow the rat to depart unharmed. If you do not, then your prince dies under my feet." "Very well, we agree," said they all. "Nay, if we do not get the ring for you, devour us all." This was rather a bold offer. However, they accomplished the thing. At midnight, when the ogress was sound asleep, one of the rats went to her bedside, climbed up on her face, and inserted its tail into her throat, whereupon the ogress coughed violently, and the ring came out and rolled on to the floor. The rat immediately seized the precious thing and ran off with it to its king, who was very glad, and went at once to the cat and released its son. As soon as the cat received the ring, she started back with the dog to go and tell their master the good tidings. All seemed safe now. They had only to give the ring to him, and he would speak to it, and the house and beautiful princess would again be with them, and everything would go on as happily as before. How glad master will be, they thought, and ran as fast as their legs could carry them. Now, on the way, they had to cross a stream. The dog swam, and the cat sat on its back. Now the dog was jealous of the cat, so he asked for the ring, and threatened to throw the cat into the water if it did not give it up, whereupon the cat gave up the ring. Sorry moment, for the dog at once dropped it, and a fish swallowed it. "Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?" said the dog. "What is done, replied the cat. "We must try to recover it, and if we do not succeed, we had better drown ourselves in this stream. I have a plan. You go and kill a small lamb, and bring it here to me." "All right," said the dog, and at once ran off. He soon came back with a dead lamb, and gave it to the cat. The cat got inside the lamb, and lay down, telling the dog to go away a little distance, and keep quiet. Not long after this, a nadar, a bird whose look can break the bones of a fish, came and hovered over the lamb, and eventually pounced down on it to carry it away. On this, the cat came out and jumped onto the bird, and threatened to kill it if it did not recover the lost ring. This was most readily promised by the nadar, who immediately flew off to the king of the fishes, and ordered it to make inquiries and to restore the ring. The king of the fishes did so, and the ring was found and carried back to the cat. "Come along now, I have got the ring," said the cat to the dog. "No, I will not," said the dog, "unless you let me have the ring. I can carry it as well as you. Let me have it, or I will kill you." So the cat was obliged to give up the ring. The careless dog very soon dropped it again. This time it was picked up and carried off by a kite. "See, see, there it goes, away to that big tree!" the cat exclaimed. "Oh, oh, what have I done?" cried the dog. "You foolish thing, I knew it would be so," said the cat. "But stop your barking, or you will frighten away the bird to some place where we shall not be able to trace it." The cat waited till it was quite dark, and then climbed the tree, killed the kite, and recovered the ring. "Come along," it said to the dog when it reached the ground. "We must make haste now. We have been delayed. Our master will die from grief and suspense. Come on." The dog, now thoroughly ashamed of himself, begged the cat's pardon for all the trouble it had given him. It was afraid to ask for the ring the third time, so they both reached their sorrowful master in safety and gave him the precious charm. In a moment his sorrow was turned into joy. He spoke to the ring, and his beautiful wife and house reappeared, and he and everybody were as happy as ever they could be. End of The Charmed Ring, from Indian Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Read by Sheetal Prasanna. The Devil with the Three Golden Hairs, from Household Tales by Brothers Grimm, by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Margaret Hunt. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Devil with the Three Golden Hairs. There was once a poor woman who gave birth to a little son, and as he came into the world with a caul on, it was predicted that in his 14th year he would have the king's daughter for his wife. It happened that soon afterwards the king came into the village, and no one knew that he was the king. And when he asked the people what news there was, they answered, "A child has just been born with a caul on. Whatever anyone so born undertakes turns out well. It is prophesied, too, that in his 14th year he will have the king's daughter for his wife." The king, who had a bad heart and was very angry about the prophecy, went to the parents and, seeming quite friendly, said, "You poor people, let me have your child, and I will take care of it." At first they refused, but when the stranger offered them a large amount of gold for it, then they thought, "It is a luck child, and everything must turn out well for it." They at last consented and gave him the child. The king put it in a box and rode away with it until he came to a deep piece of water. Then he threw the box into it and thought, "I have freed my daughter from her unlooked-for suitor." The box, however, did not sink, but floated like a boat, and not a drop of water made its way into it. and it floated to within 2 miles of the king's chief city, where there was a mill, and it came to a standstill at the mill dam. A miller's boy, who by luck was standing there, noticed it and pulled it out with a hook, thinking that he had found a great treasure. But when he opened it, there lay a pretty boy inside, quite fresh and lively. He took him to the miller and his wife, and as they had no children, they were glad and said, "God has given him to us." They took great care of the foundling, and he grew up in all goodness. It happened that once in a storm the king went into the mill, and he asked the mill folk if the tall youth was their son. "No," answered they, "he is a foundling. 14 years ago he floated down to the mill dam in a box, and the mill boy pulled him out of the water." Then the king knew that it was none other than the luck child which he had thrown into the water, and he said, "My good people, could not the youth take a letter to the queen? I will give him 2 gold pieces as a reward." "Just as the king commands," answered they, and they told the boy to hold himself in readiness. Then the king wrote a letter to the queen, wherein he said, "As soon as the boy arrives with this letter, let him be killed and buried, and all must be done before I come home." The boy set out with this letter, but he lost his way, and in the evening came to a large forest. In the darkness he saw a small light. He went towards it and reached a cottage. When he went in, an old woman was sitting by the fire, quite alone. She started when she saw the boy, and said, "Whence do you come, and whither are you going?" "I come from the mill," he answered, "and wish to go to the queen, to whom I am taking a letter. But as I have lost my way in the forest, I should like to stay here overnight." "You poor boy," said the woman, "you have come into a den of thieves, and when they come home, they will kill you." "Let them come," said the boy, "I am not afraid, but I am so tired that I cannot go any farther." And he stretched himself upon a bench and fell asleep. Soon afterwards the robbers came, and angrily asked what strange boy was lying there. "Ah," said the old woman, "it is an innocent child who has lost himself in the forest, and out of pity I have let him come in. He has to take a letter to the queen." The robbers opened the letter and read it, and in it was written that the boy, as soon as he arrived, should be put to death. Then the hard-hearted robbers felt pity, and their leader tore up the letter and wrote another, saying that as soon as the boy came, he should be married at once to the king's daughter. Then they let him lie quietly on the bench until the next morning, and when he awoke, they gave him the letter and showed him the right way. And the queen, when she had received the letter and read it, did as was written in it, and had a splendid wedding feast prepared. And the king's daughter was married to the luck child, and as the youth was handsome and agreeable, she lived with him in joy and contentment. After some time, the king returned to his palace, and saw that the prophecy was fulfilled, and the luck child married to his daughter. "How has that come to pass?" said he. "I have quite another order in my letter." So the queen gave him the letter, and said that he might see for himself what was written in it. The king read the letter, and saw quite well that it had been exchanged for the other. He asked the youth what had become of the letter entrusted to him, and why he had brought another instead of it. "I know nothing about it," answered he. "It must have been changed in the night, when I slept in the forest." The king said in a passion, "You shall not have everything quite so much your own way. Whosoever marries my daughter must fetch me from hell 3 golden hairs from the head of the devil. Bring me what I want, and you shall keep my daughter." In this way the king hoped to be rid of him forever. But the luck child answered, "I will fetch the golden hairs. I am not afraid of the devil." Thereupon he took leave of them and began his journey. The road led him to a large town, where the watchman by the gates asked him what his trade was, and what he knew. "I know everything," answered the luck child. "Then you can do us a favor?" said the watchman. If you will tell us why our market fountain, which once flowed with wine, has become dry and no longer gives even water." "That you shall know," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." Then he went farther and came to another town, and there also the gatekeeper asked him what his trade and what he knew. "I know everything," answered he. "Then can you do us a favor and tell us why a tree in our town, which once bore golden apples, now does not even put forth leaves?" "You shall know that," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." Then he went on and came to a wide river over which he must go. The ferryman asked him what his trade was and what he knew. "I know everything," answered he. "Then you can do me a favor," said the ferryman, "and tell me why I must always be rowing backwards and forwards and am never set free?" "You shall know that," answered he. "Only wait until I come back." When he had crossed the river, he found the entrance to hell. It was black and sooty within, and the devil was not at home. But his grandmother was sitting in a large armchair. "What do you want?" said she to him, but she did not look so very wicked. "I should like to have 3 golden hairs from the devil's head," answered he, "else I cannot keep my wife." "That is a good deal to ask for," said she. "If the devil comes home and finds you, it will cost you your life. But as I pity you, I will see if I cannot help you." She changed him into an ant and said, "Creep into the folds of my dress, and you will be safe there." "Yes," answered he, "so far so good, but there are 3 things besides that I want to know. Why a fountain which once flowed with wine has become dry and no longer gives even water? Why a tree which once bore golden apples does not even put forth leaves? And why a ferryman must always be going backwards and forwards and is never set free?" "Those are difficult questions," answered she, "but only be silent and quiet, and pay attention to what the devil says when I pull out the 3 golden hairs." As the evening came on, the devil returned home. No sooner had he entered than he noticed that the air was not pure. "I smell man's flesh," said he. "All is not right here." Then he pried into every corner and searched, but could not find anything. His grandmother scolded him. "It has just been swept," said she, "and everything put in order, and now you are upsetting it again. You have always got man's flesh in your nose. Sit down and eat your supper." When he had eaten and drunk, he was tired, and laid his head in his grandmother's lap, and before long he was fast asleep, snoring and breathing heavily. Then the old woman took hold of a golden hair, pulled it out, and laid it down near her. "Oh!" cried the devil, "what are you doing?" "I have had a bad dream," answered the grandmother, "so I seized hold of your hair." "What did you dream then?" said the devil. "I dreamed that a fountain in a market-place, from which wine once flowed, was dried up, and not even water would flow out of it. What is the cause of it?" "Oh, if they did but know it!" answered the devil. "There's a toad sitting under a stone in the well. If they killed it, the wine would flow again." He went to sleep again and snored until the windows shook. Then she pulled the second hair out. "Ah! What are you doing?" cried the devil angrily. "Do not take it ill," said she. "I did it in a dream." "What have you dreamt this time?" asked he. "I dreamt that in a certain kingdom there stood an apple tree which had once borne golden apples, but now would not even bear leaves. What, think you, was the reason?" "Oh, if they did but know!" answered the devil. "A mouse is gnawing at the root. If they killed this, they would have golden apples again, but if it gnaws much longer, the tree will wither altogether. But leave me alone with your dreams. If you disturb me in my sleep again, you will get a box on the ear." The grandmother spoke gently to him until he fell asleep again and snored. Then she took hold of the third golden hair and pulled it out. The devil jumped up, roared out, and would have treated her ill if she had not quieted him once more and said, "Who can help bad dreams?" "What was the dream, then?" asked he, and was quite curious. "I dreamt of a ferryman who complained that he must always ferry from one side to the other and was never released. What is the cause of it?" "Ah, the fool!" answered the devil. "When anyone comes and wants to go across, he must put the oar in his hand, and the other man will have to ferry, and he will be free." As the grandmother had plucked out the 3 golden hairs, and the 3 questions were answered, she let the old serpent alone, and he slept until daybreak. When the devil had gone out again, the old woman took the ant out of the folds of her dress, and gave the luck child his human shape again. "There are the 3 golden hairs for you," said she. "What the devil said to your 3 questions, I suppose you heard?" "Yes," answered he, "I heard, and will take care to remember." "You have what you want," said she, "and now you can go your way." He thanked the old woman for helping him in his need, and left hell well content that everything had turned out so fortunately. When he came to the ferryman, he was expected to give the promised answer. "Ferry me across first," said the luck child, "and then I will tell you how you can be set free." And when he reached the opposite shore, he gave him the devil's advice. "Next time anyone comes who wants to be ferried over, just put the oar in his hand." He went on and came to the town wherein stood the unfruitful tree, and there too the watchman wanted an answer. So he told him what he had heard from the devil. "Kill the mouse which is gnawing at its root, and it will again bear golden apples." Then the watchman thanked him, and gave him as a reward 2 donkeys laden with gold, which followed him. At last he came to the town whose well was dry. He told the watchman what the devil had said. "A toad is in the well beneath the stone. You must find it and kill it, and the well will again give wine in plenty." The watchman thanked him, and also gave him 2 donkeys laden with gold. At last the luck child got home to his wife, who was heartily glad to see him again, and to hear how well he had prospered in everything. To the king he took what he had asked for, the devil's 3 golden hairs, and when the king saw the 4 donkeys laden with gold, he was quite content, and said, "Now all the conditions are fulfilled, and you can keep my daughter. But tell me, dear son-in-law, where did all that gold come from? This is tremendous wealth." "I was rowed across the river," answered he, "and got it there. It lies on the shore instead of sand." "Can I too fetch some of it?" said the king, and he was quite eager about it. "As much as you like," answered he. "There is a ferryman on the river. Let him ferry you over, and you can fill your sacks on the other side." The greedy king set out in all haste, and when he came to the river, he beckoned to the ferryman to put him across. The ferryman came and bade him get in, and when they got to the other shore, he put the oar in his hand and sprang out. But from this time forth the king had to ferry as a punishment for his sins. Perhaps he is ferrying still. If he is, it is because no one has taken the oar from him. The end of The Devil with the 3 Golden Hairs. From Household Tales by Brothers Grimm, by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Margaret Hunt. Read by Sheetal Prasanna.
The Dinner That Ran Away by Carolyn Sherwin Bailey. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It looks as if it was going to be a green Thanksgiving Day tomorrow, Mr. Sweet, the grocer, said, as he helped Bruce to load his express cart with the things for the dinner that he had just bought for his grandmother. The cart was pretty full to begin with, for a fat turkey sat up near the seat. There were some potatoes and a big winter squash back of him, and the bag of turnips. Now there were the sugar, the cranberries, raisins, and citron to go in. But Mr. Sweet was a wonder at packing. He put all the packages in so they would not spill, and then he smiled at Bruce and at Hiram, who had come downtown to help with the Thanksgiving marketing. "Can you two fellows get home all right without a spill, do you think?" he asked. "You know it is uphill all the way, and steep at that." "Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Sweet," Bruce said. "We'll manage." "Bah!" said Hiram in a loud voice, to show that he would do his part. Hiram was Bruce's tame goat, and he could pull a loaded express cart up almost any steep hill, the cord fastened to his harness. Off they started, and soon they left the shops behind, and started up Hilldale Avenue toward Grandmother's house. Tap, tap, went Hiram's little hoofs on the sidewalk, and Bruce ran along beside, kicking the dry leaves that danced along beside him. Thanksgiving tomorrow, and roasted turkey, mashed turnips, cranberry sauce, and citrons and raisins in the fruitcake. No wonder Hiram's feet twinkled along so gaily. And Bruce drove him with a hop, skip, and a jump. All those good things to eat were right there in the cart. Up, up the avenue they climbed, and soon now they would be stopping with a flourish at Grandmother's kitchen door. Just before they reached the house, though, they came to Claire's house, and from her kitchen there drifted the sweetest kind of a smell, boiling butterscotch, and Claire always wanted to share the candy that she made with Bruce. Perhaps she had telephoned to him while he was doing the marketing. Anyway, he decided to stop and see Claire for a few moments. He tied Hiram to the hedge and went in. Yes, that was just what had happened. Claire had telephoned over to ask Bruce to come and share the butterscotch, and she was so glad that it was not too late. They poured it out into pans, cut it into little squares, and then waited a while for it to cool enough so that they might eat some. "I must go now, Claire," Bruce said at last. "You see, Hiram and I have the whole Thanksgiving dinner out here in the road." But when they went out, Hiram and the dinner were gone. "I tied him ever so carefully," Bruce said, almost ready to cry, for there was not a sight of the cart or the goat anywhere. "We must look for it, then," Claire said, and they went all the way to the bottom of the hill, and as far as Mr. Sweet's grocery store, but not even a hair of Hiram or a single raisin was to be found. "Oh, it's too bad, and it's all my fault, Bruce," Claire said, "for I was making candy and you smelled it. I'm going home with you and tell your grandmother all about it." But it was long after the time when Bruce had been expected home when they did arrive. They had spent almost an hour looking for the Thanksgiving dinner that had run away. There was Mrs. Flynn, who came sometimes to help Grandmother when she had a good deal of cooking to do in the kitchen. But she was not cooking. Oh, no, she was telling such a wonderful story that Grandfather was listening, and no one noticed Bruce and Claire as they came into the kitchen and listened too. "Not believe in fairies," Mrs. Flynn was saying, her Irish eyes blue and her wrinkled cheeks rosy with excitement. "The fairies this very day, just a bit of a while ago, brought me and Patsy and Ellen and little Bridget such a Thanksgiving dinner as we have not laid eyes on in years. A fat turkey and potatoes and squash and turnips, and all the makings of sauce and a pudding. Here were the children looking out of the window at the dinners going by, and all at once a little express cart, all alone of itself, rolled up to our gate. Out ran Patsy just in time to fetch it in. Such a dinner as we've never had in our lives before." "You don't say so," Grandfather said. "Fine, Mrs. Flynn, but odd." "I'm so glad," Grandmother said. "We were going to send some dinner down to you, but it wouldn't have been all of that." Bruce and Claire, their eyes popping out of their heads, went out into the backyard. They didn't know what to say, but just then Hiram wandered in through the gate. His mouth was red from berries he had been eating. Some green leaves hung from his whiskers, and a bit of torn rope was around his neck. Hiram always did come home in the end, and he never was able to hide anything that he had done. "Hiram has been eating from our hedge, Bruce," Claire exclaimed. "And he gnawed the rope that held the cart," Bruce went on. "And then the Thanksgiving dinner ran away down the hill to Mrs. Flynn's house, there at the beginning of the avenue," Claire giggled. "Come on in and tell Grandmother," Bruce said. "She will just be glad." "But we won't tell Mrs. Flynn," Claire added. "We'll let her believe in the fairies." And Grandmother felt just the same way about it. Patsy needed a cart, and Grandfather said that Bruce could have a new one, and they would have a chicken pie for dinner. "How about Hiram?" Bruce asked. "It looks as if it was going to be a green Thanksgiving Day," Grandfather said. You don't ever need to worry about a goat." And out in the yard, Hiram answered, "Bah!" End of The Dinner That Ran Away by Carolyn Sherwin Bailey. Read by Colleen McMahon.
The Dragon Princess, from the Chinese Fairy Book by Richard Wilhelm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Dragon Princess. In the sea of Dongting there is a hill, and in that hill there is a hole, and this hole is so deep that it has no bottom. Once a fisherman was passing there who slipped and fell into the hole. He came to a country full of winding ways, which led over hill and dale for several miles. Finally he reached a dragon castle lying in a great plain. There grew a green slime which reached to his knees. He went to the gate of the castle. It was guarded by a dragon who spouted water, which dispersed in a fine mist. Within the gate lay a small hornless dragon, who raised his head, showed his claws, and would not let him in. The fisherman spent several days in the cave, satisfying his hunger with the green slime, which he found edible and which tasted like rice mush. At last he found a way out again. He told the district mandarin what had happened to him, and the latter reported the matter to the emperor. The emperor sent for a wise man and questioned him concerning it. The wise man said, "There are 4 paths in this cave. One path leads to the southwest shore of the Sea of Dongting. The second path leads to a valley in the land of the 4 rivers. The third path ends in a cave on the mountain of Laofu, and the fourth in an island of the Eastern Sea. In this cave dwells the 7th daughter of the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, who guards his pearls and his treasure. It happened once in the ancient days that a fisher boy dived into the water and brought up a pearl from beneath the chin of a black dragon. The dragon was asleep, which was the reason the fisher boy brought the pearl to the surface without being harmed. The treasure which the daughter of the Dragon King has in charge is made up of thousands and millions of such jewels. Several thousands of small dragons watch over them in her service. Dragons have the peculiarity of fighting shy of wax, but they are fond of beautiful jade stones and of kongxing, the hollow green wood, and like to eat swallows. If one were to send a messenger with a letter, it would be possible to obtain precious pearls. The emperor was greatly pleased and announced a large reward for the man who is competent to go to the dragon castle as his messenger. The first man to come forward was named So Pi Luo, but the wise man said, "A great-great-great-great-grandfather of yours once slew more than 100 of the dragons of the Eastern Sea, and was finally himself slain by the dragons. The dragons are the enemies of your family, and you cannot go." Then came a man from Canton, Luo Zicun, with his 2 brothers, who said that his ancestors had been related to the Dragon King. Hence they were well liked by the dragons and well known to them. They begged to be entrusted with the message. The wise man asked, "And have you still in your possession the stone which compels the dragons to do your will?" "Yes," said they, "we have brought it along with us." The wise man had them show him the stone. Then he spoke. "This stone is only obeyed by the dragons who make clouds and send down the rain. It will not do for the dragons who guard the pearls of the Sea King." Then he questioned them further. "Have you the dragon brain vapor?" When they admitted that they had not, the wise man said, "How then will you compel the dragons to yield their treasure?" And the emperor said, "What shall we do?" The wise man replied, "On the Western Ocean sail foreign merchants who deal in dragon brain vapor. Someone must go to them and seek it from them. I also know a holy man who is an adept in the art of taming dragons, and who has prepared 10 pounds of the dragon stone. Someone should be sent for that as well." The emperor sent out his messengers. They met one of the holy man's disciples and obtained 2 fragments of dragon stone from him. Said the wise man, "This is what we want." Several more months went by, and at last a pill of dragon brain vapor had also been secured. The emperor felt much pleased and had his jewelers carve 2 little boxes of the finest jade. These were polished with the ashes of the wutong tree, and he had an essence prepared of the very best hollow green wood, pasted with sea fish lime and hardened in the fire. Of this 2 vases were made. Then the bodies and the clothing of the messenger were rubbed with tree wax, and they were given 500 roasted swallows to take along with them. They went into the cave. When they reached the dragon castle, the little dragon who guarded the gate smelled the tree wax, so he crouched down and did them no harm. They gave him 100 roasted swallows as a bribe to announce them to the daughter of the Dragon King. They were admitted to her presence and offered her the jade caskets, the vases, and the 400 roasted swallows as gifts. The dragon's daughter received them graciously, and they unfolded the emperor's letter. In the castle, there was a dragon who was over 1,000 years old. He could turn himself into a human being and could interpret the language of human beings. Through him, the dragon's daughter learned that the emperor was sending her the gifts, and she returned them with a gift of 3 great pearls, 7 smaller pearls, and a whole bushel of ordinary pearls. The messengers took leave, rode off with their pearls on the dragon's back, and in a moment they had reached the banks of the Changjiang. They made their way to Nanjing, the imperial capital, and there handed over their treasure of gems. The emperor was much pleased and showed them to the wise man. He said, "Of the 3 great pearls, 1 is a divine wishing pearl of the 3rd class, and 2 are black dragon pearls of medium quality. Of the 7 smaller pearls, 2 are serpent pearls and 5 are mussel pearls. The remaining pearls are in part sea crane pearls and part snail and oyster pearls. They do not approach the great pearls in value, and yet few will be found to equal them on earth." The emperor also showed them to all his servants. They, however, thought the wise man's words all talk, and did not believe what he said. Then the wise man said, "The radiance of wishing pearls of the 1st class is visible for 40 miles, that of the 2nd class for 20 miles, and that of the 3rd for 10 miles. As far as their radiance carries, neither wind nor rain, thunder nor lightning, water, fire, nor weapons may reach. The pearls of the black dragon are 9-colored and glow by night. Within the circle of their light, the poison of serpents and worms is powerless. The serpent pearls are 7-colored, the mussel pearls 5-colored. Both shine by night. Those most free from spots are the best. They grow within the mussel and increase and decrease in size as the moon waxes and wanes." Someone asked how the serpent and sea crane pearls could be told apart, and the wise man answered, "The animals themselves recognize them." Then the emperor selected a serpent pearl and a sea crane pearl, put them together with the whole bushel of ordinary pearls, and poured the lot out in the courtyard. Then a large yellow serpent and a black crane were fetched and placed among the pearls. At once the crane took up a sea crane pearl in his bill and began to dance and sing and flutter around. But the serpent snatched at the serpent pearl and wound himself about it in many coils. And when the people saw this, they acknowledged the truth of the wise man's words. As regards the radiance of the larger and smaller pearls, it turned out too, just as the wise man had said. In the dragon castle, the messengers had enjoyed dainty fare, which tasted like flowers, herbs, ointment, and sugar. They had brought a remnant of it with them to the capital, yet exposed to the air, it had become as hard as stone. The emperor commanded that these fragments be preserved in the treasury. Then he bestowed high rank and titles on the 3 brothers, and made each one of them a present of 1,000 rolls of fine silk stuff. He also had investigated why it was that the fisherman, when he chanced upon the cave, had not been destroyed by the dragons, and it turned out that his fishing clothes had been soaked in oil and tree wax. The dragons had dreaded the odor. End of The Dragon Princess from the Chinese Fairy Book by Richard Wilhelm.
Dummling and the 3 Feathers by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had 3 sons. The elder 2 were learned and bright, but the youngest said very little and appeared somewhat foolish, so he was always known as Dummling. When the king grew old and feeble, feeling that he was nearing his end, he wished to leave the crown to one of his 3 sons, but could not decide to which. He thereupon settled that they should travel, and that the one who could obtain the most splendid carpet should ascend to the throne when he died. So that there could be no disagreement as to the way each one should go, the king conducted them to the courtyard of the palace, and there blew 3 feathers, by turn, into the air, telling his sons to follow the course that the 3 feathers took. Then one of the feathers flew eastwards, another westwards, but the third went straight up towards the sky, though it only sped a short distance before falling to earth. Therefore one son travelled towards the east, and the second went to the west, both making fun of poor Dummling, who was obliged to stay where his feather had fallen. Then Dummling, sitting down and feeling rather miserable after his brothers had gone, looked about him and noticed that near to where his feather lay was a trap door. On lifting this up, he perceived a flight of steps, down which he went. At the bottom was another door, so he knocked upon it, and then heard a voice calling, "Maiden fairest, come to me, make haste to ope the door. A mortal surely you will see, from the world above is he, will help him from our store." And then the door was flung open, and the young man found himself facing a big toad sitting in the center of a number of young toads. The big toad addressed him, asking him what he wanted. Dummling, though rather surprised when he saw the toads and heard them question him, being good-hearted, replied politely, "I am desirous to obtain the most splendid carpet in the world. Just now it would be extremely useful to me." The toad who had just spoken called to a young toad, saying, "Maiden fairest, come to me. 'Tis a mortal here you see. Let us speed all his desires, giving him what he requires." Immediately the young toad fetched a large box. This the old one opened, and took out an exquisite carpet of so beautiful a design that it certainly could have been manufactured nowhere upon the earth. Taking it with grateful thanks, Dummling went up the flight of steps and was once more in the palace courtyard. The 2 elder brothers, being of the opinion that the youngest was so foolish that he was of no account whatever in trying to obtain the throne, for they did not think that he would find anything at all, had said to each other, "It is not necessary for us to trouble much in looking for the carpet." So they took from the shoulders of the first peasant they came across a coarse shawl, and this they carried to their father. At the same time, Dummling appeared with this beautiful carpet, which he presented to the king, who was very much surprised, and said, "By rights the throne should be for my youngest son." But when the 2 brothers heard this, they gave the old king no rest, saying, "How is it possible that Dummling, who is not at all wise, could control the affairs of an important kingdom? Make some other condition, we beg of you." "Well," agreed the father, "the one who brings me the most magnificent ring shall succeed to my throne." And once more he took his sons outside the palace. Then again he blew 3 feathers into the air to show the direction each one should go, whereupon the 2 elder sons went east and west, but Dumbling's flew straight up and fell close by the trap door. Then the youngest son descended the steps as before, and upon seeing the large toad he talked with her and told her what he desired. So the big box was brought, and out of it the toad handed him a ring which was of so exquisite a workmanship that no goldsmiths could equal it. Meanwhile, the 2 elder brothers made fun of the idea of Dummling searching for a ring, and they decided to take no needless trouble themselves. Therefore, finding an old iron ring belonging to some harness, they took that to the king. Dummling was there before them with his valuable ring, and immediately upon his showing it, the father declared that in justice the kingdom should be his. In spite of this, however, the 2 elder sons worried the poor king into appointing one test further before bestowing his kingdom, and the king, giving way, announced that the one who brought home the most beautiful woman should inherit the crown. Then Dummling again descended to the large toad and made known to her that he wished to find the most beautiful woman alive. "The most beautiful woman is not always at hand," said the toad. "However, you shall have her." Then she gave to him a scooped-out turnip to which 6 little mice were attached. The young man regarded this a trifle despondently, for it had no great resemblance to what he was seeking. "What can I make of this?" he asked. "Only place in it one of my young toads," replied the large toad, "and then you can decide how to use it." From the young toads around the old toad, the young man seized one at hazard and placed it in the scooped-out turnip, but hardly was it there when the most astounding change occurred, for the toad was transformed into a wondrously lovely maiden, the turnip became an elegant carriage, and the 6 mice were turned into handsome horses. The young man kissed the maiden and drove off to bring her to the king. Not long afterwards, the 2 brothers arrived. In the same way as the twice before, they had taken no trouble about the matter, but had picked up the first passable-looking peasant woman whom they had happened to meet. After glancing at the 3, the king said, "Without doubt, at my death the kingdom will be Dumbling's." Once more the brothers loudly expressed their discontent, and gave the king no peace, declaring, "It is impossible for us to agree to Dummling becoming ruler of the kingdom," and they insisted that the woman should be required to spring through a hoop which was suspended from the ceiling in the center of the hall, thinking to themselves, "Now certainly our peasants will get the best of it. They are active and sturdy, but that fragile lady will kill herself if she jumps." To this again the king consented, and the peasants were first given trial. They sprang through the hoop indeed, but so clumsily that they fell, breaking their arms and legs. Upon which the lovely lady whom Dummling had brought home leapt through as lightly as a fawn, and this put an end to all contention. So the crown came to Dummling, who lived long, and ruled his people temperately and justly. End of Dummling and the 3 Feathers by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm.
The Goose Girl by Watty Piper. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There was once an old queen who had a very beautiful daughter. The time came when the maiden was to go into a distant country to be married. The old queen packed up everything suitable to a royal outfit. She also sent a waiting woman with her. When the hour of departure came, they bade each other a sorrowful farewell, and set out for the bridegroom's country. When they had ridden for a time, the princess became very thirsty, and said to the waiting woman, "Go down and fetch me some water in my cup from the stream. I must have something to drink." "If you are thirsty," said the waiting woman, "dismount yourself, lie down by the water, and drink. I don't choose to be your servant." Being very thirsty, the princess dismounted and knelt by the flowing water. Now when she was about to mount her horse again, the waiting woman said, "By rights your horse belongs to me. This jade will do for you." The poor little princess was obliged to give way. Then the waiting woman, in a harsh voice, ordered her to take off her royal robes, and to put on her own mean garments. Finally she forced her to swear that she would not tell a person at the court what had taken place. Had she not taken the oath, she would have been killed on the spot. There was a great rejoicing when they arrived at the castle. The prince hurried towards them and lifted the waiting woman from her horse, thinking she was the bride. She was led upstairs, but the real princess had to stay below. The old king looked out of the window and saw the delicate, pretty little creature standing in the courtyard. So he asked the bride about her companion. "I picked her up on the way, and brought her with me for company. Give the girl something to do to keep her from idling." The old king said, "And have a little lad who looks after the geese. She may help him." The boy was called little Conrad, and the real bride was sent with him to look after the geese. When they reached the meadow, the princess sat down on the grass and let down her hair, and when Conrad saw it he was so delighted that he wanted to pluck some out, but she said, "Blow, blow, little breeze," and Conrad's hat ceased. "Let him join in the chase, while away it is whirled, till my tresses are curled, and I rest in my place." Then a strong wind sprang, which blew away Conrad's hat right over the fields, and he had to run after it. When he came back her hair was all put up again. When they got home Conrad went to the king and said, "I won't tend the geese with that maiden again." "Why not?" asked the king. Then Conrad went on to tell the king all that had happened in the field. The king ordered Conrad to go next day as usual, and he followed into the field and hid behind a bush. He saw it happen just as Conrad had told him. Thereupon he went away unnoticed, and in the evening when the goose girl came home he asked her why she did all these things. "That I may not tell you," she answered. Then he said, "If you won't tell me, then tell the iron stove there," and he went away. She crept up to the stove and unburdened her heart to it. The king stood outside by the pipes of the stove and heard all she said. Then he came back and caused royal robes to be put upon her, and her beauty was a marvel. Then he called his son and told him that he had a false bride, but that the true bride was here. The prince was charmed with her beauty, and a great banquet was prepared. The bridegroom sat at the head of the table, with the princess on one side and the waiting woman at the other, but she did not recognize the princess. When they had eaten, the king put a riddle to the waiting woman. "What does a person deserve that deceives his master?" telling the whole story. The false bride answered, "He must be put into a barrel and dragged along by 2 white horses till he is dead." "That is your doom," said the king, "and the judgment shall be carried out." When the sentence was fulfilled, the young prince married his true bride, and they lived together in peace and happiness. End of The Goose Girl by Watty Piper.
The Leapfrog by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. A flea, a grasshopper, and a leapfrog once wanted to see which could jump highest, and they invited the whole world and everyone else besides who chose to come to see the festival. 3 famous jumpers were they, as everyone would say when they all met together in the room. "I'll give my daughter to him who jumps highest," exclaimed the king, "for it is not so amusing when there is no prize to jump for." The flea was the first to step forward. He had exquisite manners and bowed to the company on all sides, for he had noble blood and was, moreover, accustomed to the society of man alone, and that makes a great difference. Then came the grasshopper. He was considerably heavier, but he was well-mannered and wore a green uniform, which he had by right of birth. He said, moreover, that he belonged to a very ancient Egyptian family, and that in the house where he then was, he was thought much of. The fact was, he had been just brought out of the fields and put in a pasteboard house 3 stories high, all made of court cards, with a colored side inwards, and doors and windows cut out of the body of the Queen of Hearts. "I sing so well," he said, "that 16 native grasshoppers who had chirped from infancy, and yet got no house built of cards to live in, grew thinner than they were before for sheer vexation when they heard me." It was thus that the flea and the grasshopper gave an account of themselves, and thought they were quite good enough to marry a princess. The leapfrog said nothing, but people gave it as their opinion that he therefore thought the more. And when the house dog snuffed at him with his nose, he confessed the leapfrog was of good family. The old counselor, who had had 3 orders given to him to hold his tongue, asserted that the leapfrog was a prophet, for that one could see on his back if there would be a severe or mild winter, and that was what one could not see even on the back of the man who writes the almanac. "I say nothing, it is true," exclaimed the king, "but I have my own opinion notwithstanding." Now the trial was to take place. The flea jumped so high that nobody could see where he went to, so they all asserted he had not jumped at all, and that was dishonorable. The grasshopper jumped only half as high, but he leaped into the king's face, who said that was ill-mannered. The leapfrog stood still for a long time lost in thought,
It was believed at last he would not jump at all. "I only hope he is not unwell," said the house dog, when, pop! He made a jump all on one side into the lap of the princess, who was sitting on a little golden stool close by. Hereupon the king said, "There is nothing above my daughter. Therefore to bound up to her is the highest jump that can be made. But for this one must possess understanding, and the leapfrog has shown that he has understanding. He is brave and intellectual." And so he won the princess. "It's all the same to me," said the flea. "She may have the old leapfrog for all I care. I jumped the highest, but in this world merit seldom meets its reward. A fine exterior is what people look at nowadays." The flea then went into foreign service, where, it is said, he was killed. The grasshopper sat without on a green bank, and reflected on worldly things. And he said too, "Yes, a fine exterior is everything. A fine exterior is what people care about." And then he began chirping his peculiar melancholy song, from which we have taken this history, and which may, very possibly, be all untrue, although it does stand here printed in black and white. End of The Leapfrog by Hans Christian Andersen.
A Little Present for a Good Child by A. Phelps Greenfield. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Little Present. The squirrel leaps from tree to tree. The hive doth hold the honey bee. The pretty butterfly is seen when little girls trip o'er the green. The owl until the evening sleeps. The serpent on his belly creeps. The lion roars, the woods resound. The raging bull tears up the ground. The raven for his food doth cry. The eagle soars exceeding high. Whilst the ploughman drives his plough, Betty milks the brindled cow. The ship doth cross the foaming seas. The woodman fells the sturdy trees. The pretty lambs do skip and play. The fox conveys the fowls away. The cat destroys the rats and mice. The teacher gives thee good advice. The cock doth crow at break of day. The fish does in the river play. The swan delights o'er streams to glide, and Joe and Billy take a ride. The blushing flowers bloom in spring. The birds do in the bushes sing. The Bible is the best of books. Good children all have modest looks. In spring the farmer sows his seed, and Charlie likes this book to read. End of A Little Present for a Good Child by A. Phelps Greenfield.
Little One Eye, Two Eyes, and Three Eyes by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time there was a woman who had 3 daughters, the eldest of whom was named One Eye because she had but a single eye, and that placed in the middle of her forehead. The second was called Two Eyes because she was like other mortals, and the third, Three Eyes, because she had 3 eyes, and one of them in the center of her forehead like her eldest sister. But because her second sister had nothing out of the common in her appearance, she was looked down upon by her sisters and despised by her mother. "You are no better than common folk," they would say to her. "You do not belong to us." And then they would push her about, give her coarse clothing, and nothing to eat but their leavings, besides numerous other insults as occasion offered. Once it happened that Two Eyes had to go into the forest to tend to the goat, and she went very hungry because her sisters had given her very little to eat that morning. She sat down upon a hillock and cried so much that her tears flowed almost like rivers out of her eyes. By and by she looked up and saw a woman standing by, who asked, "Why are you weeping, Two Eyes?" "Because I have 2 eyes like ordinary people," replied the maiden, "and therefore my mother and sisters dislike me, push me into corners, throw me their old clothes, and give me nothing to eat but what they leave. Today they have given me so little that I am still hungry." "Dry your eyes then now," said the wise woman. "I will tell you something which shall prevent you from being hungry again. You must say to your goat, 'Little kid, milk, table, appear.' And immediately a nicely filled table will stand before you, with delicate food upon it, of which you can eat as much as you please. And when you are satisfied and have done with the table, you must say, 'Little kid, milk, table, depart,' and it will disappear directly." With these words the wise woman went away, and little Two Eyes thought to herself she would try at once if what the woman said were true, for she felt very hungry indeed. "Little kid, milk, table, appear," said the maiden, and immediately a table covered with a white cloth stood before her, with a knife and fork and silver spoon, and the most delicate dishes were arranged in order upon it, and everything as warm as if they had been just taken away from the fire. Two Eyes said a short grace and then began to eat, and when she had finished, she pronounced the words which the wise woman had told her, "Little kid, milk, table, depart," and directly the table and all that was on it quickly disappeared. "This is capital housekeeping," said the maiden in high glee, and at evening she went home with her goat and found an earthen dish which her sisters had left her filled with their leavings. She did not touch it, and the next morning she went off again without taking the meagre breakfast which was left out for her. The first and second time she did this, the sisters thought nothing of it, but when she did the same the third morning, their attention was roused, and they said, "All is not right with Two Eyes, for she has left her meals twice, and has touched nothing of what was left for her. She must have found some other way of living." So they determined that One Eye should go with the maiden when she drove the goat to the meadow, and pay attention to what passed, and observe whether any one brought her to eat or to drink. When Two Eyes, therefore, was about to set off, One Eye told her she was going with her to see whether she took proper care of the goat and fed her sufficiently. Two Eyes, however, divined her sister's object, and drove the goat where the grass was finest, and then said, "Come, One Eye, let us sit down, and I will sing to you." So One Eye sat down, for she was quite tired with her unusual walk and the heat of the sun. "Are you awake or asleep, One Eye? Are you awake or asleep?" sang Two Eyes, until her sister really went to sleep. As soon as she was quite sound, the maiden had her table out, and ate and drank all she needed, and by the time One Eye woke again, the table had disappeared, and the maiden said to her sister, "Come, we will go home now. While you have been sleeping, the goat might have run about all over the world." So they went home, and after Two Eyes had left her meal untouched, the mother inquired of One Eye what she had seen, and she was obliged to confess that she had been asleep. The following morning, the mother told Three Eyes that she must go out and watch Two Eyes and see who brought her food, for it was certain that someone must. So Three Eyes told her sister that she was going to accompany her that morning to see if she took care of the goat and fed her well, but Two Eyes saw through her design and drove the goat again to the best feeding place. Then she asked her sister to sit down and she would sing to her, and Three Eyes did so, for she was very tired with her long walk in the heat of the sun. Then Two Eyes began to sing as before, "Are you awake, Three Eyes?" But instead of continuing as she should have done, "Are you asleep, Three Eyes?" she said by mistake, "Are you asleep, Two Eyes?" and so went on singing, "Are you awake, Three Eyes? Are you asleep, Two Eyes?" By and by Three Eyes closed 2 of her eyes and went to sleep with them, but the third eye, which was not spoken to, kept open. Three Eyes, however, cunningly shut it to and feigned to be asleep, while she was really watching, and soon Two Eyes, thinking all safe, repeated the words, "Little kid, milk, table, appear," and as soon as she was satisfied, she said the old words, "Little kid, milk, table, depart." Three Eyes watched all these proceedings, and presently Two Eyes came and awoke her, saying, "Ah, sister, you are a good watcher, but come, let us go home now." When they reached home, Two Eyes again ate nothing, and her sister told her mother she knew now why the haughty hussy would not eat their victuals. "When she is out in the meadow," said her sister, "she says, 'Little kid, milk, table, appear,' and directly a table comes up laid out with meat and wine and everything of the best, much better than we have, and as soon as she has had enough, she says, 'Little kid, milk, table, depart,' and all goes away directly, as I clearly saw. Certainly she did put to sleep 2 of my eyes, but the one in the middle of my forehead luckily kept awake. Will you have better things than we? Cried the envious mother. Then you shall lose the chance. And so saying, she took a carving knife and killed the goat dead. As soon as Two Eyes saw this, she went out, very sorrowful, to the old spot, and sat down where she had sat before, to weep bitterly. All at once the wise woman stood in front of her again, and asked why she was crying. Must I not cry, replied she, when the goat, which used to furnish me every day with a dinner, according to your promise, has been killed by my mother, and I am again suffering hunger and thirst? Two Eyes, said the wise woman, I will give you a piece of advice. Beg your sisters to give you the entrails of the goat, and bury them in the earth before the house door, and your fortune will be made. So saying, she disappeared, and Two Eyes went home and said to her sisters, Dear sisters, do give me some part of the slain kid. I desire nothing else. Let me have the entrails. The sisters laughed and readily gave them to her, and she buried them secretly before the threshold of the door, as the wise woman had bidden her. The following morning they found in front of the house a wonderfully beautiful tree, with leaves of silver and fruits of gold hanging from the boughs, than which nothing more splendid could be seen in the world. The 2 elder sisters were quite ignorant how the tree came where it stood, but Two Eyes perceived that it was produced by the goat's entrails, for it stood on the exact spot where she had buried them. As soon as the mother saw it, she told One Eye to break off some of the fruit. One Eye went up to the tree and pulled a bough towards her to pluck off the fruit, but the bough flew back again directly out of her hands, and so it did every time she took hold of it, till she was forced to give up, for she could not obtain a single golden apple in spite of all her endeavors. Then the mother said to Three Eyes, Do you climb up, for you can see better with your 3 eyes than your sister with her one. Three Eyes, however, was not more fortunate than her sister, for the golden apples flew back as soon as she touched them. At last the mother got so impatient that she climbed the tree herself, but she met with no more success than either of her daughters, and grasped the air only when she thought she had the fruit. Two Eyes now thought she would try, and said to her sisters, Let me get up, perhaps I may be successful. Oh, you are very likely indeed, said they, with your 2 eyes you will see well, no doubt. So Two Eyes climbed the tree, and directly she touched the boughs, the golden apples fell into her hands, so that she plucked them as fast as she could, and filled her apron before she went down. Her mother took them of her, but returned her no thanks, and the 2 sisters, instead of treating Two Eyes better than they had done, were only the more envious of her, because she alone could gather the fruit. In fact, they treated her worse. One morning, not long after the springing up of the apple tree, the 3 sisters were all standing together beneath it, when in the distance a young knight was seen riding toward them. Make haste, Two Eyes, exclaimed the 2 elder sisters. Make haste and creep out of our way, that we may not be ashamed of you. And so saying, they put over her in great haste an empty cask which stood near, and which covered the golden apples as well, which she had just been plucking. Soon the knight came up to the tree, and the sisters saw he was a very handsome man, for he stopped to admire the fine silver leaves and golden fruit, and presently asked to whom the tree belonged, for he should like to have a branch off it. One Eye and Three Eyes replied that the tree belonged to them, and they tried to pluck a branch off for the knight. They had their trouble for nothing, however, for the boughs and fruit flew back as soon as they touched them. This is very wonderful, cried the knight, that this tree should belong to you, and yet you cannot pluck the fruit. The sisters, however, maintained that it was theirs, but while they spoke, Two Eyes rolled a golden apple from underneath the cask, so that it travelled to the feet of the knight, for she was angry, because her sisters had not spoken the truth. When he saw the apple, he was astonished, and asked where it came from, and One Eye and Three Eyes said they had another sister, but they dared not let her be seen, because she had only 2 eyes like common folk. The knight, however, would see her, and called, Two Eyes, come here, and soon she made her appearance from under the cask. The knight was bewildered at her great beauty, and said, You, Two Eyes, can surely break off a bough of this tree for me? Yes, she replied, that I will, for it is my property. And climbing up, she easily broke off a branch with silver leaves and golden fruit, which she handed to the knight. What can I give you in return, Two Eyes? Asked the knight. Alas, if you will take me with you, I shall be happy, for now I suffer hunger and thirst, and am in trouble and grief from early morning to late evening. Take me and save me. Thereupon the knight raised Two Eyes upon his saddle and took her home to his father's castle. There he gave her beautiful clothes and all she wished for to eat or to drink, and afterward, because his love for her had become so great, he married her, and a very happy wedding they had. Her two sisters, meanwhile, were very jealous when Two Eyes was carried off by the night, but they consoled themselves by saying, "The wonderful tree remains still for us, and even if we cannot get at the fruit, everybody that passes will stop to look at it, and then come to praise it to us. Who knows where our wheat may bloom?" The morning after the speech, however, the tree disappeared, and with it all their hopes. But when Two Eyes that same day looked out of her chamber window, behold, the tree stood before it, and there remained. For a long time after this occurrence, Two Eyes lived in the enjoyment of the greatest happiness, and one morning two poor women came to the palace and begged an alms. Two Eyes, after looking narrowly at their faces, recognized her two sisters, One Eye and Three Eyes, who had come to such great poverty that they were forced to wander about, begging their bread from day to day. Two Eyes, however, bade them welcome, invited them in, and took care of them, till they both repented of their evil which they had done to their sister in the days of their childhood. End of Little One Eye, Two Eyes, and Three Eyes by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm.
Rapunzel from Grimm's Fairy Stories by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Rapunzel. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window in the back of their house from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress, who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, Rapunzel, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it, and had the greatest desire to eat some. This desire increased every day, and as she knew that she could not get any of it, she quiet pined away, and looked pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed, and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't get some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house to eat, I shall die." The man, who loved her, thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself, let it cost you what it will." In the twilight of evening he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it, and ate it with much relish. She, however, liked it so much, so very much, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of evening, therefore, he let himself down again, but when he had clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," she said with angry look, "to descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window, and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and said to him, "If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother." The man, in his terror, consented to everything, and when the little one came to them, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child beneath the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and had neither stairs nor door. But quite at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath this and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 yards down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and went by the tower. Then he heard a song which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I will for once try my fortune," said he, and the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Immediately the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her, quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for a husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than old Dame Gothel does." And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it, and when that is ready I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to see her every evening, for the old lady came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this, until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger, she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice around her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with her right, and snip, snip, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground. And she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day, however, that she cast out Rapunzel, the enchantress in the evening fastened the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but he did not find his dearest Rapunzel above, but the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks. "Aha!" she cried mockingly, "you would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her more." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered, quite blind, about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did nothing but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert where Rapunzel lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it, and when he approached, Rapunzel knew him and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. End of Rapunzel from Grimm's Fairy Stories by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. Recorded by Sheetal Prasanna. The Devoted Friend from The Happy Prince and Other Tales by Oscar Wilde. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Devoted Friend. One morning, the old water rat put his head out of his hole. He had bright, beady eyes and stiff gray whiskers, and his tail was like a long bit of black India rubber. The little ducks were swimming about in the pond, looking just like a lot of yellow canaries, and their mother, who was pure white with real red legs, was trying to teach them how to stand on their heads in the water. "You will never be in the best society unless you can stand on your heads," she kept saying to them, and every now and then she showed them how it was done. But the little ducks paid no attention to her. They were so young that they did not know what an advantage it is to be in society at all. "What disobedient children!" cried the old water rat. "They really deserve to be drowned." "Nothing of the kind," answered the duck. "Everyone must make a beginning, and parents cannot be too patient." "Ah, I know nothing about the feelings of parents," said the water rat. "I am not a family man. In fact, I have never been married, and I never intend to be. Love is all very well in its way, but friendship is much higher. Indeed, I know of nothing in the world that is either nobler or rarer than a devoted friendship." "And what, pray, is your idea of the duties of a devoted friend?" asked a green linnet who was sitting in a willow tree hard by, and had overheard the conversation. "Yes, that is just what I want to know," said the duck, and she swam away to the end of the pond and stood up on her head in order to give her children a good example. "What a silly question!" cried the water rat. "I should expect my devoted friend to be devoted to me, of course." "And what would you do in return?" said the little bird, swinging upon a silver spray and flapping his tiny wings. "I don't understand you," answered the water rat. "Let me tell you a story on the subject," said the linnet. "Is the story about me?" asked the water rat. "If so, I will listen to it, for I am extremely fond of fiction." "It is applicable to you," answered the linnet, and he flew down, and alighting upon the bank, he told the story of the devoted friend. "Once upon a time," said the linnet, "there was an honest little fellow named Hans." "Was he very distinguished?" asked the water rat. "No," answered the linnet. "I don't think he was distinguished at all, except for his kind heart and his funny, round, good-humored face. He lived in a tiny cottage all by himself, and every day he worked in his garden. In all the countryside there was no garden so lovely as his. Sweet William grew there, and gillyflowers, and shepherd's purses, and fair maids of France. There were damask roses and yellow roses, lilac crocuses and gold, purple violets and white, columbine and ladysmock, marjoram and wild basil, the cowslip and the flower de luc, the daffodil and the clove pink, bloomed or blossomed in their proper order as the months went by, one flower taking another flower's place, so that there was always beautiful things to look at and pleasant odors to smell. Little Hans had a great many friends, but the most devoted friend of all was Big Hugh the miller. Indeed, so devoted was the rich miller to little Hans that he would never go by his garden without leaning over the wall and plucking a large nosegay or a handful of sweet herbs, or filling his pockets with plums and cherries if it was the fruit season. "Real friends should have everything in common," the miller used to say, and little Hans nodded and smiled and felt very proud of having a friend with such noble ideas. Sometimes, indeed, the neighbors thought it strange that the rich miller never gave little Hans anything in return. Though he had 100 sacks of flour stored away in his mill, and 6 milch cows, and a large flock of woolly sheep, but Hans never troubled his head about these things, and nothing gave him greater pleasure than to listen to all the wonderful things the miller used to say about the unselfishness of true friendship. So little Hans worked away in his garden. During the spring, the summer, and the autumn he was very happy. But when the winter came, and he had no fruit or flowers to bring to the market, he suffered a good deal from cold and hunger, and often had to go to bed without any supper but a few dried pears or some hard nuts. In the winter also he was extremely lonely, as the miller never came to see him then. "There is no good in my going to see little Hans as long as the snow lasts," the miller used to say to his wife, "for when people are in trouble they should be left alone, and not be bothered by visitors. That at least is my idea about friendship, and I'm sure I'm right. So I shall wait till the spring comes, and then I shall pay him a visit, and he will be able to give me a large basket of primroses, and that will make him so happy." "You are certainly very thoughtful about others," answered the wife as she sat in her comfortable armchair by the big pinewood fire. "Very thoughtful indeed. It is quite a treat to hear you talk about friendship. I'm sure the clergyman himself could not say such beautiful things as you do, though he does live in a 3-storied house and wear a gold ring on his little finger." "But could we not ask little Hans up here?" said the miller's youngest son. "If poor Hans is in trouble, I will give him half my porridge, and show him my white rabbits." "What a silly boy you are!" cried the miller. "I really don't know what is the use of sending you to school. You seem not to learn anything. Why, if little Hans came up here and saw our warm fire and our good supper and our great cask of red wine, he might get envious, and envy is a most terrible thing, and would spoil anybody's nature. I certainly will not allow Hans' nature to be spoiled. I am his best friend, and I will always watch over him, and see that he is not led into any temptations. Besides, if Hans came here, he might ask me to let him have some flour on credit, and that I could not do. Flour is one thing, and friendship is another, and they should not be confused. Why, the words are spelt differently, and mean quite different things. Everybody can see that." "How well you talk," said the miller's wife, pouring herself out a large glass of warm ale. "Really, I feel quite drowsy. It is just like being in church." "Lots of people act well," answered the miller, "but very few people talk well, which shows that talking is much the more difficult thing of the two, and much the finer thing also." And he looked sternly across the table at his little son, who felt so ashamed of himself that he hung his head down, and grew quite scarlet, and began to cry into his tea. However, he was so young that you must excuse him. "Is that the end of the story?" asked the water rat. "Certainly not," answered the linnet. "That is the beginning." "Then you are quite behind the age," said the water rat. "Every good storyteller nowadays starts with the end, and then goes on to the beginning and concludes with the middle. That is the new method. I heard all about it the other day from a critic who was walking around the pond with a young man. He spoke of the matter at great length, and I am sure he must have been right, for he had blue spectacles and a bald head, and whenever the young man made any remark, he always answered, 'Pooh!' But pray, go on with your story. I like the miller immensely. I have all kinds of beautiful sentiments myself, so there is a great sympathy between us." "Well," said the linnet, hopping now on one leg and now on the other, "as soon as the winter was over and the primroses began to open their pale yellow stars, the miller said to his wife that he would go down and see little Hans." "Why, what a good heart you have!" cried his wife. "You are always thinking of others, and mind you take the big basket with you for the flowers." So the miller tied the sails of the windmill together with a strong iron chain, and went down the hill with the basket on his arm. "Good morning, little Hans," said the miller. "Good morning," said Hans, leaning on his spade and smiling from ear to ear. "And how have you been all the winter?" said the miller. "Well, really," cried Hans, "it is very good of you to ask, very good indeed. I'm afraid I had rather a hard time of it, but now the spring has come, and I'm quite happy, and all my flowers are doing well." "We often talked of you during the winter, Hans," said the miller, "and wondered how you were getting on." "That was kind of you," said Hans. "I was half afraid you had forgotten me." "Hans, I'm surprised at you," said the miller. "Friendship never forgets. That is the wonderful thing about it. But I'm afraid you don't understand the poetry of life. How lovely your primroses are looking, by the by." "They are certainly very lovely," said Hans, "and it is a most lucky thing for me that I have so many. I am going to bring them into the market and sell them to a burgomaster's daughter, and buy back my wheelbarrow with the money." "Buy back your wheelbarrow? You don't mean to say you sold it? What a very stupid thing to do." "Well, the fact is," said Hans, "that I was obliged to. You see, the winter was a very bad time for me, and I really had no money at all to buy bread with. So I first sold the silver buttons off my Sunday coat, and then I sold my silver chain, and then I sold my big pipe, and at last I sold my wheelbarrow. But I'm going to buy them all back again now." "Hans," said the miller, "I will give you my wheelbarrow. It is not in very good repair. Indeed, one side is gone, and there is something wrong with the wheel spokes. But in spite of that, I will give it to you. I know it is very generous of me, and a great many people would think me extremely foolish for parting with it. But I am not like the rest of the world. I think that generosity is the essence of friendship. And besides, I have got a new wheelbarrow for myself. Yes, you may set your mind at ease, and I will give you my wheelbarrow." "Well, really, that is generous of you," said little Hans, and his funny round face glowed all over with pleasure. "I can easily put it in repair, as I have a plank of wood in the house." "A plank of wood," said the miller. "Why, that is just what I want for the roof of my barn. There is a very large hole in it, and the corn will all get damp if I don't stop it up. How lucky you mentioned it! It is quite remarkable how one good action always breeds another. I have given you my wheelbarrow, and now you are going to give me your plank. Of course, the wheelbarrow is worth far more than the plank, but true friendship never notices things like that. Pray get it at once, and I will set at work at my barn this very day." "Certainly," cried little Hans, and he ran into the shed and dragged the plank out. "It's not a very big plank," said the miller, looking at it, "and I'm afraid that after I have mended my barn roof there won't be any left for you to mend the wheelbarrow with. But of course that's not my fault. And now, as I have given you my wheelbarrow, I'm sure you would like to give me some flowers in return. Here is the basket, and mind you fill it quite full." "Quite full?" said little Hans rather sorrowfully, for it was really a very big basket, and he knew that if he filled it he would have no flowers left for the market, and he was very anxious to get his silver buttons back. "Well, really," answered the miller, "as I have given you my wheelbarrow, I don't think that is much to ask you for a few flowers. I may be wrong, but I should have thought that friendship, true friendship, was quite free from selfishness of any kind." "My dear friend, my best friend," cried little Hans, "you are welcome to all the flowers in my garden. I would much sooner have your good opinion than my silver buttons any day." And he ran and plucked all his pretty primroses and filled the miller's basket. "Good-bye, little Hans," said the miller as he went up the hill with the plank on his shoulder and the big basket in his hand. "Good-bye," said little Hans, and he began to dig away quite merrily. He was so pleased about the wheelbarrow. The next day he was nailing up some honeysuckle against the porch, when he heard the miller's voice calling to him from the road. So he jumped off the ladder and ran down the garden and looked over the wall. There was the miller with a large sack of flour on his back. "Dear little Hans," said the miller, "would you mind carrying this sack of flour for me to market?" "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Hans, "but I'm really very busy today. I have got all my creepers to nail up, and all my flowers to water, and all my grass to roll." "Well, really," said the miller, "I think that, considering that I am going to give you my wheelbarrow, it is rather unfriendly of you to refuse." "Oh, don't say that," cried little Hans. "I wouldn't be unfriendly for the whole world." And he ran in for his cap and trudged off with the big sack on his shoulders. It was a very hot day, and the road was terribly dusty. and before Hans had reached the 6th milestone, he was so tired that he had to sit down and rest. However, he went on bravely, and at last he reached the market. After he had waited there some time, he sold a sack of flour for a very good price, and then he returned home at once, for he was afraid that if he stopped too late, he might meet some robbers on the way. "It has certainly been a hard day," said little Hans to himself as he was going to bed, "but I'm glad I did not refuse the miller, for he is my best friend, and besides, he is going to give me his wheelbarrow." Early the next morning the miller came down to get the money for his sack of flour, but little Hans was so tired that he was still in bed. "Upon my word," said the miller, "you are very lazy. Really, considering that I am going to give you my wheelbarrow, I think you might work harder. Idleness is a great sin, and I certainly don't like any of my friends to be idle or sluggish. You must not mind my speaking quite plainly to you. Of course, I should not dream of doing so if I were not your friend. But what is the good of friendship if one cannot say exactly what one means? Anybody can say charming things and try to please and to flatter, but a true friend always says unpleasant things and does not mind giving pain. Indeed, if he is a really true friend, he prefers it, for he knows that then he is doing good." "I am very sorry," said little Hans, rubbing his eyes and pulling off his nightcap, "but I was so tired that I thought I would lie in bed for a little time and listen to the birds singing. Do you know that I always work better after hearing the birds sing?" "Well, I'm glad of that," said the miller, clapping little Hans on his back, "for I want you to come up to the mill as soon as you are dressed, and mend my barn roof for me." Poor little Hans was very anxious to go and work in his garden, for his flowers had not been watered for 2 days, but he did not like to refuse the miller, as he was such a good friend to him. "Do you think it would be unfriendly of me if I said I was busy?" he inquired in a shy and timid voice. "Well, really," answered the miller, "I do not think it is much to ask of you, considering that I am going to give you my wheelbarrow. But of course, if you refuse, I'll go and do it myself." "Oh, on no account!" cried little Hans, and he jumped out of bed and dressed himself and went up to the barn. He worked there all day long, till sunset, and at sunset the miller came to see how he was getting on. "Have you mended the hole in the roof yet, little Hans?" cried the miller in a cheery voice. "It is quite mended," answered little Hans, coming down the ladder. "Ah," said the miller, "there is no work so delightful as the work one does for others." "It is certainly a great privilege to hear you talk," answered little Hans, sitting down and wiping his forehead. "A very great privilege, but I'm afraid I shall never have such beautiful ideas as you have." "Oh, they will come to you," said the miller, "but you must take more pains. At present you have only the practice of friendship. Some day you will have the theory also." "Do you really think I shall?" said little Hans. "I have no doubt of it," answered the miller. "But now that you have mended the roof, you had better go home and rest, for I want you to drive my sheep to the mountain tomorrow." Poor little Hans was afraid to say anything to this, and early the next morning the miller brought his sheep round to the cottage, and Hans started off with them to the mountain. It took him the whole day to get there and back, and when he returned he was so tired that he went off to sleep in his chair and did not wake up till it was broad daylight. "What a delightful time I shall have in my garden," he said, and he went to work at once. But somehow he was never able to look after his flowers at all, for his friend the miller was always coming around and sending him off on long errands, or getting him to help at the mill. Little Hans was very much distressed at times, as he was afraid his flowers would think he had forgotten them, but he consoled himself by the reflection that the miller was his best friend. "Besides," he used to say, "he is going to give me his wheelbarrow, and that is an act of pure generosity." So little Hans worked away for the miller, and the miller said all kinds of beautiful things about friendship, which Hans took down in a notebook and used to read over at night, for he was a very good scholar. Now it happened that one evening little Hans was sitting by his fireside when a loud rap came at the door. It was a very wild night, and the wind was blowing and roaring round the house so terribly that at first he thought it was merely the storm. But a second rap came, and then a third, louder than any of the others. "It is some poor traveller," said little Hans to himself, and he ran to the door. There stood the miller, with a lantern in one hand and a big stick in the other. "Dear little Hans," cried the miller, "I am in great trouble. My little boy has fallen off a ladder and hurt himself, and I am going for the doctor. But he lives so far away, and it is such a bad night, that it has just occurred to me that it would be much better if you went instead of me. You know I am going to give you my wheelbarrow, and so it is only fair that you should do something for me in return." "Certainly," cried little Hans. "I take it quite as a compliment, you coming to me, and I will start off at once. But you must lend me your lantern, as the night is so dark, and I'm afraid I might fall into the ditch." "I am very sorry," answered the miller, "but it is my new lantern, and it would be a great loss to me if anything happened to it." "Well, never mind, I will do without it," cried little Hans, and he took down his great fur coat and his warm scarlet cap, and tied a muffler round his throat, and started off. What a dreadful storm it was! The night was so black that little Hans could hardly see, and the wind was so strong that he could hardly stand. However, he was very courageous, and after he had been walking about 3 hours, he arrived at the doctor's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" cried the doctor, putting his head out his bedroom window. "Little Hans, doctor." "What do you want, little Hans?" "The miller's son has fallen from a ladder and has hurt himself, and the miller wants you to come at once." "All right," said the doctor, and he ordered his horse and his big boots and his lantern, and came downstairs and rode off in the direction of the miller's house, little Hans trudging behind him. But the storm grew worse and worse, and the rain fell in torrents, and little Hans could not see where he was going, or keep up with the horse. At last he lost his way, and wandered off on the moor, which was a very dangerous place, as it was full of deep holes, and there poor little Hans was drowned. His body was found the next day by some goatherds, floating in a great pool of water, and was brought back by them to the cottage. Everybody went to little Hans's funeral, as he was so popular, and the miller was the chief mourner. "As I was his best friend," said the miller, "it is only fair that I should have the best place." So he walked at the head of the procession in a long black cloak, and every now and then he wiped his eyes with a big pocket handkerchief. "Little Hans is certainly a great loss to everyone," said the blacksmith when the funeral was over, and they were all seated comfortably in the inn, drinking spiced wine and eating sweet cakes. "A great loss to me, at any rate," answered the miller. "Why, I had as good as given him my wheelbarrow, and now I really don't know what to do with it. It is very much in my way at home, and it is in such bad repair that I could not get anything for it if I sold it. I'll certainly take care not to give away anything again. One always suffers for being generous." "Well," said the water rat after a long pause. "Well, that is the end," said the linnet. "But what became of the miller?" asked the water rat. "Oh, I really don't know," replied the linnet, "and I'm sure that I don't care." "It is quite evident then that you have no sympathy in your nature," said the water rat. "I'm afraid you don't quite see the moral of the story," remarked the linnet. "The what?" screamed the water rat. "The moral." "Do you mean to say that the story has a moral?" "Certainly," said the linnet. "Well, really," said the water rat in a very angry manner, "I think you should have told me that before you began. If you had done so, I certainly would not have listened to you. In fact, I should have said 'Pooh!' like the critic. However, I can say it now." So he shouted out "Pooh!" at the top of his voice, gave a whisk with his tail, and went back into his hole. "And how do you like the water rat?" asked the duck, who came paddling up some minutes afterwards. "He has a great many good points, but for my own part, I have a mother's feelings, and I can never look at a confirmed bachelor without the tears coming into my eyes." "I'm rather afraid that I have annoyed him," answered the linnet. "The fact is that I told him a story with a moral." "Ah, that is always a very dangerous thing to do," said the duck, and I quite agree with her. End of The Devoted Friend from The Happy Prince and Other Tales by Oscar Wilde. Read by Sheetal Prasanna.
The Three Little Kittens by Anonymous. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Three little kittens lost their mittens, and they began to cry. "Oh, mammy dear, we sadly fear our mittens we have lost." "What? Lost your mittens, you naughty kittens? Then you shall have no pie." Meow, 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 meow. The three little kittens then sought their mittens upon the table high. Indoors and out they scampered about, for they were very spry. Now high, now low, the three in a row, and oh, how they made things fly. Mew, 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 mew. The three little kittens found their mittens, and they began to cry. "Oh, mammy dear, see here, our mittens we have found." "What? Found your mittens, you darling kittens? Then you shall have some pie." Purr, 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 purr. The three little kittens put on their mittens and soon ate up the pie. "Oh, mammy dear, we sadly fear our mittens we have soiled." "What? Soiled your mittens, you naughty kittens?" Then they began to sigh. Meow, 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 meow. The three little kittens washed their mittens and hung them up to dry. "Oh, mammy dear, look here, our mittens we have washed." "What? Washed your mittens, you good little kittens? But I smell a rat close by." "Hush, hush, mew, 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 mew." These kittens so gay were invited one day to feast by a running stream, where they had as much meat as they wanted to eat, and plenty of nice ice cream. And each went to sleep curled up in a heap, and had a most lovely dream. Purr, 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 purr. One night in the fall they went to a ball and danced to a lively tune, with a leap and a bound and a merry-go-round and the sound of a big bassoon. And with holes in their mittens these careless kittens came home by the light of the moon. Meow, 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 meow. These kittens, 'twas said, were soon to be wed. The cards had been out some days, and cat-birds no doubt spread the news about, as they flew o'er the great highways. And cats, one and all, the great and the small, were loud in the kittens' praise. Meow, 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 meow. At last came the day, and in splendid array the guests soon began to arrive, the aunts and the cousins by sixes and dozens, all buzzing like bees in a hive, and among them Sir Rouser, a famous old mouser, and the handsomest Maltese alive. Purr, 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 purr. Then after the marriage each groom called his carriage, and oh, they rode off in fine style, the brides beaming brightly and bowing politely to friends every once in a while, who kept up a squalling and great caterwauling that might have been heard for a mile. Meow, 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 meow. The guests kept on dancing, now leaping and prancing, the band still continued to play. And Puss in the corner and little Jack Homer, where games were very much in their way, with singing and screeching and laughter far-reaching, they had a good time, I dare say. Meow, 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 meow. The three pretty brides and their husbands besides took rooms in a very nice flat. Not a rat nor a mouse was e'er seen in the house, nor anyone heard to cry scat. So they lived and looked pleased, they were petted, not teased. Now what do you think of that? Purr, 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 purr. End of The Three Little Kittens by Anonymous, read by Calvin Cruz.
The Three Little Pigs by Unknown. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time there was an old sow with three little pigs, and as she had not enough to keep them, she sent them out to seek their fortune. The first that went off met a man with a bundle of straw, and said to him, "Please, man, give me that straw to build a house," which the man did, and the little pig built a house with it. Presently came along a wolf, and knocked at the door, and said, little pig, let me come in." To which the pig answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed, and he blew his house in, and ate up the little pig. The second pig met a man with a bundle of furs, and said, "Please, man, give me that furs to build a house," which the man did, and the pig built his house. Then along came the wolf, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll puff, and I'll huff, and I'll blow your house in." So he huffed and he puffed, and he puffed and he huffed, and at last he blew the house down, and ate up the second little pig. The third little pig met a man with a load of bricks, and said, "Please, man, give me those bricks to build a house with." So the man gave him the bricks, and he built his house with them. So the wolf came, as he did to the other little pigs, and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." Well, he huffed and he puffed, and he huffed and he puffed, and he puffed and he huffed, but he could not get the house down. When he found that he could not, with all his huffing and puffing, blow the house down, he said, little pig, I know where there is a nice field of turnips." "Where?" said the little pig. "Oh, in Mr. Smith's home field, and if you will be ready tomorrow morning, I will call for you, and we will go together and get some for dinner." "Very well," said the little pig, "I will be ready. What time do you mean to go?" "Oh, at 6 o'clock." Well, the little pig got up at 5, and got the turnips, and was home again before 6. When the wolf came, he said, little pig, are you ready?" "Ready," said the little pig. "I have been and come back again, and got a nice potful for dinner." The wolf felt very angry at this, but thought that he would be up to the little pig somehow or other, so he said, little pig, I know where there is a nice apple tree." "Where?" said the pig. "Down at Merry Garden," replied the wolf, "and if you will not deceive me, I will come for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we will go together and get some apples." Well, the little pig woke up at 4 the next morning, and bustled up, and went off for the apples, hoping to get back before the wolf came. But he had farther to go, and had to climb the tree, so that just as he was coming down from it, he saw the wolf coming, which, as may suppose, frightened him very much. When the wolf came up, he said, little pig, what? Are you here before me? Are they nice apples?" "Yes, very," said the little pig. "I will throw you down one." And he threw it so far that, while the wolf was gone to pick it up, the little pig jumped down and ran home. The next day the wolf came again, and said to the little pig, little pig, there is a fair in the town this afternoon. Will you go?" "Oh, yes," said the pig, "I will go. What time shall I be ready?" "At 3," said the wolf. So the little pig went off before the time, as usual, and got to the fair, and bought a butter churn, and was on his way home with it when he saw the wolf coming. Then he could not tell what to do, so he got into the churn to hide, and in doing so turned it around, and it began to roll, and rolled down the hill with the pig inside, which frightened the wolf so much that he ran home without going to the fair. He went to the little pig's house, and told him how frightened he had been by a great round thing which came down the hill past him. And the little pig said, "Ha! I frightened you, did I? I had been to the fair and bought a butter churn, and when I saw you I got into it, and rolled down the hill." Then the wolf was very angry indeed, and declared he would eat up the little pig, and that he would get down the chimney after him. When the little pig saw what he was about, he hung the pot full of water, and made up a blazing fire, and, just as the wolf was coming down, took off the cover of the pot, and in fell the wolf. And the little pig put on a cover again in an instant, boiled him up, and ate him for supper, and lived happily ever after. End of The Three Little Pigs, by Unknown.